Welcome to the first episode of the Winner's Circle with NexusTek, the podcast series where we explore how technology is helping businesses win in today's competitive landscape. I'm your host, Pablo Maedla, and today we're diving into something that could either unlock millions in federal contracts or completely shut you out of the game, CMMC 2.0. Joining me today is a man that's been dubbed the IT business therapist. He brings decades of experience leading technology and cybersecurity, the VCISO here at NexusTek, James Reed. James, welcome to the Winner's Circle.
Yeah, thank you, Pavli. Good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. Before we dive in, I really would like to set the stage. So, for our audience who might not be familiar, can you give us a quick elevator pitch on what CMMC 2.0 is and why it matters?
Absolutely. So it's a cybersecurity model or maturity model that was put together by the DoD. This is not the first round of this. They've
Okay.
enhanced it over the years and released a ruling, about a year and a half ago. They finalized that ruling about 6 months ago. But what it is, to boil it down, is a set of controls, and controls
Okay.
are policies like the things that you do, the technology you have in place, right? Having a firewall, using multi-factor authentication. It's the conglomerate of all the things that you do to protect sensitive data in the DoD space, right? In the defense industrial base.
Regarding DoD, have read that contracts this year are set to surpass $500 billion, with a B. Help me understand, like, what's the full scope of the opportunity here that we're talking about with vendors that do comply with CMMC 2.0?
It's a bunch of different areas of the business, I guess is the best way to phrase it, right? This is every part of the defense base that you can imagine, from big prime contractors like Lockheed and Raytheon and Northrop, and they don't do everything from beginning to end, right? If they need a bolt for a missile or for a helicopter, they're
Yeah.
going to subcontract that out. So
Yeah,
you've got
right.
giant prime contractors, the names that we've all heard of, down to little tiny machine shops and IT firms. And to your question, right, what does this mean, or what is the opportunity, right? This is going to affect the providers themselves in that defense space, right? The subs of the subs, the people that are getting the work downstream. But it's also going to affect people that are managing IT, like NexusTek does, people that are managing compliance, like I do. And it's going to affect these small shops that historically haven't been held rigorously to that standard.
Hmm.
And I guess my only other comment there is part of why CMMC 2.0 was developed is that about 5 or 6 years ago, the DoD went out and did an audit of
Yeah.
the subs all the way down and found that 70% didn't meet the minimum requirement.
Wow.
So that's
Wow.
really the driver behind this new set of requirements. And we can talk, about what they are at a high level, but the big thing that matters the most is that they roll downhill. So if you're doing
Wow.
work for Northrop and you're a little machine shop, but you have that sensitive information, you're expected to meet the same level of security requirements.
Yeah, 70% having not met the requirements previously. And I know I was actually even looking at some of the data now that's showing with the new CMMC 2.0 requirements that only 4% of companies are truly ready. And essentially 96% of potential competitors are just out of the picture at this point in time. I mean, do those numbers sound accurate? What do those numbers say to you?
I mean, A, they sound accurate for sure,
Yeah.
Pavli. And what does it say to me? It says there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And for those companies, it's turning into a pay to play model, right? If you want to play in the
Right.
DoD sandbox, you've got to be doing certain things. And that's where these adjacent opportunities for auditing firms, managed service providers, and consultants come into play. But at a high level, right, I can even talk about a recent introduction. I was brought into a client once they were
Mhm.
notified that they had had an event. Can't go into specifics, obviously, but data
Yeah.
was found somewhere that it shouldn't have been found. And the DoD came in and audited themselves. The actual DoD auditors, called DIBCAT, came in and performed an audit, and they failed at roughly 80% failure rate. And
Wow.
these was a very large organization building components for critical infrastructure in the DoD.
What is, I guess, the method of remediation there? Is there any, what steps do we take when we step in and try to assist a client like that?
Great question. So we do a couple things. And if I were to break it into a simple 1, 2, 3, 4 model, we start with assessing where they're at, right? Let's perform a gap assessment. Let's understand, and in this case, this particular client had a gap assessment performed by the DoD, but let's identify where the holes are. And from there, we build a roadmap. And as a consultant and as a business owner myself, I like to make sure that roadmap says, here are your costs. Here's kind of the timeline to go execute on that. So they have a really good understanding of what they're taking on. And frankly, there have been small shops that I've said, you know what, DoD work is a small piece of our business. We're just going to stop doing it. And that's a business decision, right? If it's going to cost you
Right.
a ton of money to be compliant and it's not a big part of your business, maybe you decide not to do it. Once we build that, the formal terms that the DoD looks for are a system security plan, which is here's all the stuff we do, right? That consists of the technical controls like a firewall, right? The administrative controls like policies and procedures. And it consists of the other thing they want to see is a plan of action. Um, Another recent example is I had a client that I work with that works with one of those big prime contractors we named off,
Yeah.
and they were not in adherence with the requirements, and they were issued a work stoppage. No more
Wow.
purchase orders, no more bids, no more. They're done, and everything they do is in the defense space. So you can imagine as I get on the phone with the owner, and he says, we can't just have a complete, the faucet can't just turn off.
Yeah.
How do we fix this? And so we built out the SSP, that system security plan. We built out
Hmm.
the plan of action and milestones, and we showed not only what they were doing going forward, but we also showed what they'd done up to that point. And then we got on the phone with the risk manager for this big prime contractor, and we were able to demonstrate collaboratively based on them as the company, the work they've done, and then me as not only the consultant but also a former auditor. Here's what we've done, what we're doing, and this should hopefully gives you a higher level of confidence that we're moving in the right direction. And if not, what else do you need from us so that we can reopen that faucet? Unfortunately, we got off that call with still it's a yellow light. It wasn't a green light, but they
Yeah.
opened up purchase orders and allowed them to start bidding again.
That said, with the new requirements coming from CMMC 2.0, is there some type of timeline where, we've got a hard stop? How much runway do companies have at this point in time to get this right?
The short version is there's a little bit of gray area there because we haven't been told you have to have everything in place by this date, but the expectation is that by the end of 25, by the end of this calendar year, that most, if not all, contracts, and keep in mind, right, they're supposed to have flow down. So your contract with Northrop should say you have to have this in place, which means when you go sub with a machining shop, you need to tell them they need to have it in place. The expectation is that everyone is including this in their contracts here this year.
And so, in terms of including it in their contracts, I also understand that there are different levels of compliance that need to be achieved. Can you break down what each level means and how these companies can figure out which level they need to achieve?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are three levels, and that's a change, just to share transparently. The old version of CMMC 2 had five, so they were
Got
condensed
it.
into three. The three levels, level one is essentially just like the number, the lowest and the easiest, and the number of controls that you need to have are less. And the big difference between level one and the rest is you're dealing with what's called FCI, Federal Contract Information. And there's a definition around that. You will typically know based on the contracts, and that's what I tell people. If you're not sure, look at the contracts, and after looking at the contracts, if you're still not sure, engage a professional. We would love to come in and help you interpret that and to make sure that you're meeting those requirements before you find out the hard way. But level one is essentially federal contract information, and it is not CUI. CUI is controlled unclassified information, so it's not classified, right? It's not top secret, but it is controlled, meaning that it's been designated that it needs to have certain restrictions around it, like it can't leave the U.S., like it needs to be encrypted, it needs to be handled certain ways, there needs to be authority given or access given based on someone with authority to give that access. So between levels 2 and 3, and again, this is where contracts come in. The
Yeah.
contract will designate, is this standard CUI or is this high value CUI? If you're at a level 3, there are some requirements don't change substantially, but the audit process does. Instead of bringing in a certified third-party auditor, you may end up working with a Department of Defense auditor, like I mentioned, that DIBCAC team.
Yeah.
But either way, level 2 and 3, both CUI. Level 3 tends to be high value CUI. So if you are building missile components or Black Hawk helicopters, you may be dealing with higher value, but you got to defer to the contract and you've got to defer to the documentation. So everything that is classified as CUI has someone responsible for that designation and the method in which it needs to be controlled or handled. And that's again something we can help you with interpreting, and help you understand how to handle it so that you can not only handle it internally, but also make sure your downstream vendors, suppliers, providers, partners, etc., that they're also meeting those requirements.
And so, James, I think today we've covered quite a bit of ground. For any business leader that might be listening to this and is thinking, I really need to act on this, what are the first three things they should do within the next week?
I think the first three things they should do is a understand what they have, right? And that's going to be the contracts, that's going to be the customers, and it's going to be the type of data, right? Do you have CUI or FCI? And again, if you're not sure, ask for help. That's why folks
Yeah.
like NexusTek exist. But that would be number one. Let's figure out what you have. Number two, try and get a pulse on where you are relative to the NIST 800-171 controls. And sorry for the technical acronym, but that is the de facto. NIST has established a set of controls. There's 110 of them that say exactly what you need to do. And what's really nice about that is they've also published the audit guide. So you can go look at it and say, here's how the auditors
Yeah.
can check my compliance.
Yeah.
Um, if you're not up for that level of bedtime reading, again, bring in a third party. I can help navigate that with you. But knowing where you are and what you have, knowing where you stand relative to the controls, and then if you are buttoned up, and you have not yet engaged a third party to go through the formal audit process, but you feel like you're meeting 110 and you can show the documentation and the technical controls and the processes, then the next step is to start thinking about getting that in place. When we asked about timeline, the only other thing I'd mention on timeline is if you aren't completely compliant, there's basically a 180-day window
Okay.
for remediation, and not everything in that list of controls can be put on a plan of action. There are certain things that they say that's too risky, that can't be on your plan of action. So, that's not something we would expect every business owner to understand. That's typically where you're going to want to bring in a partner.
And so that said, I mean, when companies are looking to choose their CMMC 2.0 partners, what should they be looking for? What questions should they be asking to separate who the real experts are, from those that might just be jumping on the bandwagon?
Well, I always would start with, do you have anyone in your organization that has done this? And without necessarily naming client names, can you give us
Yeah.
examples, right? I'd ask them to articulate their approach. If they don't have an approach that starts with understanding what you have, both contractually and data wise, what you have technology and control wise. If they don't articulate a process that walks you through mapping out where you are to get there, I would be concerned. Um, there are some certifications out there. We're seeing more and more people get those certifications. There's one for a certified professional and a certified auditor. But I would go out. The only word of caution is if you go to the source of truth on the internet and you look at who the certified auditors are, they call them a C3PAO, certified third party
Okay.
organization. So in talking about the third parties, right, the C3PAO, certified third party audit organization, or assessor, the big thing to be aware of is that the folks that guide you through the process
Yeah.
can't also be the auditor that audits you.
Got it.
So
Got it.
it's good. It's good to think about. You may end up with two partners. I'm doing
Hmm.
this right now for someone in developing nuclear components. They're leveraging us to be kind of the consultant and to help them get ready and to do a lot of the work. They're going to need to bring in someone else to actually perform the audit. So kind of the separation of duties, if you will.
James, this has been incredibly valuable. I really appreciate the time. And key takeaway for me here is that don't wait. Don't be in the 96% of companies that are treating CMMC 2.0 as just another problem to solve or just another compliance check mark. Real businesses can win by actually treating it as an opportunity to capture and by moving quickest to market.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the big difference. And I went to a pretty significant conference in DC, about 6 months ago. The big difference is going to be the folks that have this in place are going to be the ones that can continue to bid on work. And there will come a point in time where we see more and more companies that get complete work stoppages.
Any additional questions that you feel like, customers, as they're evaluating partners, what they should be probing on, what they should be doing to ensure who the real experts might be in this scenario?
I would ask what the track record has been. Not only, have you worked with clients, but what is the typical time that it's taken you, and what is the typical cost that you've incurred to get there. Recent example was a client that came to us after almost 2 years and a third of $1 million, but they had not moved the needle. They had a really great
Wow.
gap analysis, and they hadn't actually done anything else except pay for consulting time for almost 24 months.
Wow.
And we're about 12 months in and far less than that dollar amount. And they're going to be compliant here in the next 90 days or so. And
Wow.
mind you, this is a 16-person shop. That's a lot of money for a small organization like
Yeah. And so, James, are there any other things that a company like NexusTek can bring to the audit process that would help businesses be successful?
I think a couple of the big ones, we talked about doing a mock audit, but helping to gather the evidence. There are things auditors are going to look for. If
Mhm.
we can't go pull those in advance because they're not there, they're obviously going to be an issue in the audit. So having someone like us, especially folks that have been on the other side of the audit table, help you go through that audit in advance and pull that evidence together, that's huge. And then the second piece I would add is when I go into an audit with folks, and I just did this for another client recently, I sat down with them in advance and we spent a little bit of time talking about here's what an audit process looks like. Here's ways to answer questions so that we don't create unnecessary rabbit holes and potential problems that didn't need to be there.
For our listeners who want to learn more about CMMC 2.0 or just getting started on the compliance journey, just go ahead and visit nexustech.com. You'll be able to see our contact us page. We'll get you in touch with someone like James immediately. James, thank you again for joining us on the Winner's Circle.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Papa. And this is something I love. I'm one of those weird guys that likes compliance, so happy to help.
Awesome. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you all for joining. And remember, the future belongs to those who are embracing change today. We'll see you on the next one. Take care and goodbye now.